Let's talk about dwarves and axes. Ever since I started doing martial arts, I always wondered, why in the world did Tolkien and the rest of the fantasy authors make the dwarves use axes, when the natural living environment of the dwarves were caves, underground passages, and all sorts of other places, mainly characterized by being confined. I just wondered, why not just use a spear, like any normal, reasonable person would do in such a place? The spear attacks in a linear fashion, so you don't have a big chance of hitting any walls, unlike when you swing something, which can actually catch a wall, and your weapon hitting a wall can have a number of disastrous effects. One of them is that it will become dull. Typically, axes and such weapons are not designed to hit rocks. That will dull their cutting edge. And secondly, but most importantly, the moment that you hit that edge, your weapon stops. That moment, you are totally open to a counterattack, which, given that you are completely exposed, will very likely be lethal. So it always seemed like the usage or the preference of dwarves towards axes and other similar swinging weapons when they are mostly fighting underground was unreasonable. And thus I thought that maybe those fantasy authors, such as Tolkien, and also everybody else, who all have dwarves using axes, just didn't know better, just had very limited knowledge or understanding of how weapons work. But the last few years, I came to reconsider my opinion on that. And here is the reason. So our body, when we attack with a weapon, it mainly has two functions. One is a pushing function, when you're pushing something towards your opponent, and in that category weapons would fall such as spears, the gladius sword of the Romans, or any other weapon that is designed to stab. And then there are swinging weapons, which means weapons you need to take a swing with at your opponent for them to work. That mostly includes bladed weapons, but there are also some others, such as hammers, for example, or maces. Now, here is the realization that made me reconsider and made the whole dwarves using axes instead of spears make sense. We develop our strength in different ways in our body, depending on what we mostly do. That means that if somebody is throwing a certain type of punch all day, then that guy has to make another type of punch when he fights. That is not going to work very well because his muscles have been accustomed to certain movements. If he breaks out of those movements, they will just not be optimally used. They will just not work as well. So what do the dwarves do all day in those fantasy worlds? What they do is they dig, they mine for coal or gems or metals. They also chop trees to stoke their fires so that they can forge stuff. And the other thing that they do is that they smith. Shout out to the best smiths I know, which is actually Lee and Nicole Smith from Blood and Iron Martial Arts. And Lee actually is a bit of a dwarf. So here's the thing. Once you've taken too many swings at a rock, or at something that you're forging, or at a tree that just happens to be in your way, your body has developed a certain type of strength, which favors the muscles that help you swing an object downwards all the way down to horizontally. In HEMA, we also have another type of strike, which is an understrike, or an Unterhau. But a dwarf would be unlikely to have trained that kind of strike too much, for the simple reason that you never hit upwards when you are digging, or when you are chopping trees, or when you are blacksmithing. Now, that being said, a lot of the activities that the dwarves were doing were also taking place underground. So once you swing some kind of pickaxe against a rock one too many times, you do actually gain a spatial awareness for that specific place with such a type of tool or weapon. So that makes it, due to experience, very unlikely that you will actually not calculate well and end up hitting rock. What is more, axes are great because they're a type of weapon that can very well be combined with a shield. And one of the characteristics that a shield has is that the shorter you are, the better it protects you. A main drawback of most shields, especially small shields, is that they cannot really protect your legs very well. You need to make huge movements, which will then expose your head and neck in order to protect your legs with a shield. Or you need to squat down so that you lower your center of gravity, and that takes time and also effort. But if you're very short and stocky like a dwarf, you don't really need to do much. especially since the attack will be coming from above you, because the arms or whatever is attacking you will be over you. So now that I come to think of it, rather than having a spear that you will be trying to poke somebody with and keep that person at the edge of your spear in a narrow corridor in a cave, a dwarf would have a much better time just charging at that person or beast and using his superhuman explosion, endurance and strength bash the living out of his opponent. And if he has a shield in front of him while he's doing so, all that can be performed in almost absolute safety. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and thanks for tuning in to discuss such important issues of our time. Indeed, there might be many problems in the world right now, but I think we tackled the most important one. And that is understanding why the dwarves were fighting with axes underground.